We were invited to celebrate my grandfather's 68th birthday, a milestone he insisted had to be unforgettable. He said he wanted the kind of party people would still talk about long after he was gone. That was my grandfather, always romanticizing life, always demanding moments to savor. He invited everyone, family, friends, acquaintances, and turned his house into a festival. Tables groaned under the weight of food, conversations buzzed in every corner, and music echoed from every wall. It was, by all accounts, a night meant to be perfect. Laura, my wife, was at my side when we arrived, clutching my hand like she always did at big gatherings. I didn't think much of it then, just figured she was nervous in crowds. It was her first major event with my extended family, and I knew she'd want to make a good impression. She looked radiant in her emerald dress, the kind of beauty that makes you stop mid-conversation just to catch your breath. We made our way through the sea of people, introducing her to distant aunts and cousins, laughing over inside jokes with uncles I hadn't seen in years. The night started off exactly as it should, filled with warmth, wine, and nostalgia. Grandfather was at the center of it all, basking in the attention, while the rest of us enjoyed being wrapped up in the comfort of family. It was the kind of evening where you lose track of time, because everything feels exactly as it should, safe, familiar. And Laura, ever the perfect partner, blended seamlessly into it all. At some point, the usual groups began to form. The uncles at one table with their cigars, cousins on the dance floor, and a few friends from the past huddled by the bar reminiscing over the good old days. I saw Laura drifting toward one such group, my best friend Alex among them. I felt a flicker of pride seeing her charm them, exchanging stories, laughing effortlessly. Alex had been my closest friend since we were kids. If there was anyone I trusted without question, it was him. We'd grown up sharing secrets and scrapes, and there wasn't a person in the world I was more at ease with. Laura knew this too. She'd always enjoyed his company, but that night, something about their interaction felt different. I noticed how she leaned in a bit too close, how her eyes sparkled not just with the lightness of the party, but with something else I couldn't name. It was small, subtle, a gesture most people wouldn't even register. But for some reason, it stuck with me. As the night deepened and the party became wilder, I found myself on the couch nursing one too many drinks. I was content, slightly drunk, and lulled by the comforting hum of the celebration. Laura had stayed near Alex most of the night, which didn't bother me. Or at least I told myself it didn't. They were friends, after all. What was there to worry about? But then I noticed something strange. Laura wasn't just talking with Alex anymore. It felt like she was anchored to him. She laughed louder than usual, her gaze lingering just a fraction longer than it should. There was a tension in the way she moved, something deliberate, rehearsed, as though she was playing a part. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was all in my head. She'd had a few drinks, and Alex always knew how to make people feel comfortable. That's all it was, I told myself. Just two people enjoying each other's company. Nothing more. But as the hours stretched on, that gnawing feeling in my gut grew stronger. Something about the way she looked at him, touched his arm, whispered into his ear. It felt wrong, even if I couldn't put my finger on why. I told myself I was overreacting. Alcohol does strange things to the mind, especially to an already anxious one. At one point, I lost sight of her entirely. She was no longer where I'd last seen her, and the space beside Alex was now empty. I scanned the room, my buzz fading as unease settled into my bones. I tried not to panic. Maybe she'd gone to the bathroom or outside for air. But as half an hour passed with no sign of her, I couldn't ignore the rising tide of dread that churned in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I pushed myself off the couch, my head spinning from the alcohol, and set off in search of her. I wandered through the crowded rooms, checking each cluster of guests, but Laura wasn't anywhere. My mind raced, every logical excuse I could think of falling flat. I told myself to breathe, to not jump to conclusions, but the anxiety clawed deeper into me. Then I noticed my grandfather, who had also grown concerned. "Have you seen Laura?" he asked as he walked beside me, his old eyes scanning the crowd. I shook my head, and together, we ventured upstairs, thinking she might have slipped away with a few people to play a board game or just catch a quieter moment. As we reached the second floor, laughter echoed from behind a closed door at the end of the hall, a laugh that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't a playful laugh or the kind you share over an inside joke. It was a drunken, careless sound, so out of place that I immediately knew it belonged to Laura. My grandfather was the one who opened the door. I stood beside him, bracing myself for some trivial, drunken scene. A group of friends passed out or playing cards. But what I saw was something I could never have prepared for. Laura was there, and she was naked. The sight hit me like a freight train, knocking the breath out of me. There she was in front of everyone, and in front of Alex. I felt my grandfather stagger beside me, his hand clutched to his chest in disbelief. I heard him mutter something under his breath before he turned pale, rushing down the stairs to escape the scene that would no doubt haunt him. As for me, I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Alex, my closest friend, lay sprawled on the bed, his shirt unbuttoned, laughing like an idiot too drunk to care about the consequences. And Laura, my wife, didn't seem the least bit ashamed. She laughed along with him, stumbling around the room as if it were some private joke between them. I wanted to scream, to yell, to tear Alex apart limb by limb. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by disbelief, my mind spinning in circles, trying to reconcile the person I saw before me with the woman I thought I knew. Everything I believed in, every memory, every shared moment, it all shattered in an instant, leaving me standing there, surrounded by the broken pieces of a life I no longer understood. I stood there, frozen, my mind a haze of disbelief and rage, watching Laura stumble in front of Alex, naked and laughing like a child unaware of the disaster she was creating. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, wide and glazed over with alcohol, but there wasn't a flicker of guilt or recognition, just a drunken haze masking the gravity of what she had done. The walls seemed to close in as a suffocating mix of humiliation and anger gripped me. My hands trembled at my sides. I couldn't process it. How did things spiral so far, so fast? I could feel the storm rising inside me. And before I even realized it, I was yelling her name, my voice cracking through the stale, wine-soaked air of the room. Laura! The sound of her name, sharp and filled with fury, echoed down the hall like a siren. I expected her to snap out of it, to feel some ounce of shame, but she only giggled, staggering backward as if this were all a joke. Alex lay on the bed, still grinning stupidly, as if nothing could touch him. Put on your clothes? I barked, my voice louder than I'd ever heard it. I felt the heat rush to my face, the weight of embarrassment crashing down on me. I reached for the crumpled dress tossed haphazardly on the floor and tried to wrap it around her, but she swatted at me like a child unwilling to cooperate. Stop it, Laura, just stop. She twisted away from me, giggling, her movements clumsy and ridiculous. The absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. My wife, naked in front of my best friend, acting as if nothing mattered, as if there were no consequences for any of it. I tried again, wrapping the fabric around her shoulders, but she shrugged it off, throwing her head back in laughter. My heart pounded against my ribs, every second amplifying the shame boiling inside me. I could feel my grip on reality slipping. This nightmare was playing out before my eyes, and I had no way to stop it. Laura, please! I pleaded, the words tumbling out of me, raw and desperate. But she just laughed louder, her drunken joy cutting deeper than any insult ever could. I grabbed the dress and tried one more time to pull it over her, but she resisted, twisting in my grasp until we both stumbled. Her laughter rang in my ears like nails on a chalkboard, taunting me, stripping me of whatever pride I had left. Then the shouting started. People heard the commotion and came running. I could hear footsteps racing up the stairs, hushed murmurs growing louder as curious family members gathered at the door. Is everything okay? Someone called out, their voice cautious, hesitant. The door swung open wider, and in the doorway stood a small crowd. My family, my friends, staring in stunned silence at the scene inside. My heart sank into a bottomless pit. Time slowed as the weight of their judgment bore down on me. There was no way to explain this, no way to undo what they had just seen. Laura was still half-dressed, struggling drunkenly against me, her laughter echoing in the tense air. And there I was, gripping her dress, my face twisted with shame and fury. The whispers began. People averted their eyes, exchanging glances but saying nothing. I could see it all written on their faces. The pity, the disbelief, the awkward discomfort. My grandfather's friends muttered under their breath. A few cousins looked away, and someone whispered to another, "What the hell is going on in there?" I stood frozen, paralyzed by humiliation. My mind screamed at me to fix this, to cover her, to protect her from their eyes, but my body refused to move. The shame was unbearable, washing over me in waves that drowned out everything else. I could feel my skin burning, as if the very air in the room had turned toxic, choking the life out of me. I let go of the dress. It crumpled to the floor between us like a symbol of my failure, an empty gesture that did nothing to hide the damage already done. Laura, in her drunken stupor, leaned against the wall and laughed again, oblivious to the crowd gathering in the doorway. I couldn't take it. I couldn't stand there and watch her unravel everything, our marriage, my dignity, in front of people I cared about. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the murmuring crowd an unbearable presence pressing down on me. Without a word, I turned on my heel and pushed past the bystanders. I stumbled down the stairs, my heart racing, my mind spinning in circles as I fought the urge to scream. I could hear someone calling after me, my grandfather, maybe, but I didn't look back. I couldn't look at any of them. I needed to get out, to escape the weight of it all before it crushed me completely. I burst through the front door, the cool night air slapping me in the face. It was a relief, but only for a moment. I doubled over, gasping for breath as the reality of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave. My wife had humiliated me in front of my family. She had destroyed everything, our trust, my reputation, without a second thought. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something, to release the fury that raged inside me. But all I could do was stand there, panting like an animal, while my mind tried desperately to make sense of it all. The house behind me buzzed with muted conversations and curious glances from the windows. I knew they were talking about us, about me, about what they had just witnessed, and I knew I couldn't face them again. Not now. Not like this. I had to get away. I couldn't stand the thought of returning to that room, of seeing her again, drunk and laughing like none of it mattered. The shame was too heavy, the humiliation too raw. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I ran down the driveway, past the parked cars into the night. My feet pounded against the pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away, to outrun the shame that clung to me like a second skin. I needed space. I needed silence. I needed to find a place where I could breathe again, where the weight of everything wouldn't crush me into dust. I needed to report what had happened. Not to the police, not yet. But I had to tell someone, anyone, just to make it real, to make sense of the chaos swirling in my mind. Maybe if I spoke it aloud, it would start to make sense. Maybe if I told someone what she had done, the pain would start to ease. But for now, all I could do was run, the cool night air filling my lungs, as I tried desperately to outrun the life that had shattered in that. I ran through the night, the chill air biting at my skin, my legs moving on instinct alone. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. My heart raced faster than my thoughts, which bounced chaotically between disbelief and anger, between shame and confusion. Laura's drunken laughter still echoed in my ears, taunting me with the weight of my humiliation. I felt as if the whole world had cracked open beneath my feet, leaving me to freefall with no end in sight. At some point, I slowed down and started walking, aimlessly, trying to collect myself. The streets were silent, the glow of the occasional street lamp the only witness to my shame. I pulled out my phone, desperate for distraction, anything to silence the whirlwind in my head. That's when I saw it. My grandfather had texted me. "Take your foolish wife away." What a disgrace. I can't believe what I saw tonight. The words hit me like a hammer. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath freezing in my lungs as I stared at the screen. Another text popped up before I could fully process the first. I am so ashamed of her. I had to leave my own party to avoid throwing up. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call. My grandfather's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring, paralyzed by a storm of emotions I couldn't contain. Anger, shame, disappointment, and above all, an unbearable weight of failure. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could I even say? What excuse could I offer for what Laura had done? The buzzing stopped, leaving only the silence of the night. But the shame lingered. It pressed down on my chest, squeezing every bit of air from my lungs. I stared at his texts until the letters blurred, the weight of his disappointment too heavy to bear. This wasn't just about what Laura had done. It was about what she'd done in front of everyone I loved. She had stripped me of any shred of respect I had left, leaving me exposed not just to her betrayal, but to the pity and judgment of my family. Grandfather's words felt like knives digging into old wounds, and each time I reread them, the pain intensified. I tried to tell myself that I wasn't responsible for her actions, but that didn't matter. What mattered was how it looked, how it felt, and right now, it felt like I was the one who had failed. I had failed to protect myself, failed to protect my marriage, and now everyone knew. They saw me as weak. They saw me as a man who couldn't even control the most personal parts of his life. My grandfather's shame became my own, and I couldn't shake it. The text burned into my mind as I resumed walking, my steps heavy, each one dragging me closer to the inevitable, the house I shared with her. The house where everything would now feel different, colder, smaller. When I finally reached the front door, I stood there for a moment, staring at it. The place that had once been a home now felt like a trap, a cage I had to enter with no choice but to confront the wreckage Laura had left in her wake. The weight of everything, her betrayal, the public humiliation, my grandfather's scorn, bore down on me so heavily that it hurt to stand upright. I unlocked the door, slipped inside, and collapsed on the couch without even bothering to take off my shoes. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. The darkness suited me just fine. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly, hoping that unconsciousness would be a brief escape from the nightmare that had become my reality. It wasn't peace I found, though. My mind spun in endless loops, replaying the events of the evening over and over. I saw Laura, laughing as if the destruction she caused meant nothing. I heard Alex's drunken snickers, tasted the bitter shame of my grandfather's texts, and felt the crushing weight of knowing that everyone, family, friends, had witnessed my downfall. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under, though it wasn't restful. My sleep was shallow, restless, filled with dreams that twisted and warped reality into strange shapes. In every dream, Laura was always laughing, always out of reach, while I stood frozen, helpless to stop her from unraveling everything we had built. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight streamed weakly through the curtains, casting dull beams across the room. My head throbbed from the alcohol and lack of sleep, but the emotional hangover was worse. For a moment, lying on the couch, I let myself believe it had all been a dream, that if I stayed still long enough, maybe the memories would dissolve into nothingness. But reality hit me like a slap when I heard a soft knock on the front door. I knew who it was before I even opened my eyes. I could feel it, the heaviness in the air, the quiet apology waiting on the other side. With a groan, I forced myself up, my body aching from the uncomfortable night on the couch. I shuffled toward the door, my steps heavy and reluctant. When I pulled it open, there she stood, Laura, her eyes puffy from crying, her clothes rumpled and stale from the night before. She looked a mess, but worse than that, she looked remorseful. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. "Let me explain." I stared at her, my chest tightening with the same cocktail of anger and shame I'd carried through the night. She stepped forward, but I blocked the door, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. "I was drunk," she said, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "I didn't know what I was doing. I swear." "Stop," I snapped, my voice low and sharp. "Just stop." But she didn't. She kept going. as if saying the words faster might make them more believable. It was a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Please, you have to believe me. Her tears came then, and I hated how familiar they felt. I had seen her cry before, over small arguments, over silly mistakes. But this was something else entirely. And yet, she looked at me with the same pleading eyes, as if expecting that the tears alone would wash away what she'd done. I don't even remember half of it, she whispered, wiping at her face with trembling hands. If I was sober, it never would have happened. You know I love you. Her words fell flat, empty and meaningless. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like betrayal and humiliation wrapped up in excuses. Love wasn't supposed to leave you feeling hollow. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice breaking under the weight of it all. Please, please don't throw us away over one stupid mistake. I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, anything, but all I felt was tired. So damn tired. I looked at her, at the woman I thought I knew, and I realized with a sick twist in my gut that I didn't recognize her anymore. The Laura standing in front of me wasn't the person I married. She was someone else entirely. Someone reckless, someone careless, someone who had taken everything we had and shattered it in front of the people who mattered most to me. I can't, I whispered, the words heavy on my tongue. I can't do this. She shook her head, her tears falling harder now. Please don't say that. We can fix this. I'll do it. No. I cut her off, my voice firmer this time. Just go. Her sobs filled the silence between us, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The man I used to be, the man who would have tried to comfort her, who would have fought to save us, was gone. He had vanished sometime between the laughter upstairs and the shameful walk home. Laura stood there for a moment longer, her shoulders trembling with the weight of her regret. Then, slowly, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with nothing but the ashes of what we once had. After Laura left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring into the empty street. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for her to come back and beg me one more time, or maybe for some sign that things would magically make sense. But there was nothing, just the faint sound of birds chirping and the occasional car passing by, completely indifferent to the wreckage of my life. Eventually, I closed the door and drifted back to the couch. I collapsed onto it, feeling as though my bones were made of lead. The exhaustion from the night before was still clinging to me, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, the same images replayed behind my eyelids. Laura laughing, her naked body on display, the crowd gathering at the door, and my grandfather's words burning into my mind. Take your foolish wife away. I lay there motionless for hours, the weight of everything pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I kept running over every detail of the night, hoping to find some clue, some explanation that would make it all feel less awful. But there was no comfort to be found, just shame, and that awful, gnawing question. How could she do this to me? I was sinking deeper and deeper into that pit when my phone buzzed against my chest. I ignored it at first, hoping whoever it was would give up, but the buzzing persisted. With a groan, I fumbled for the phone, my hands still sluggish from the weight of exhaustion and anger. It was Alex. The sight of his name on the screen made my stomach turn. My hands tightened around the phone, and for a moment, I considered tossing it across the room. But curiosity, or maybe the need for answers, got the better of me. I swiped to answer, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. Hey man, his voice was hesitant, slurred slightly, as if he were still nursing a hangover. I didn't respond. The silence between us stretched long and heavy, filled with all the things I wanted to say, but couldn't. Oh, look, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About last night, Alex mumbled, sounding like a coward scrambling for redemption. I was drunk, too drunk. It shouldn't have happened. His words washed over me like acid, burning through my already fragile composure. My jaw clenched so tightly it felt like my teeth might crack. How easy it was for him to say that. Just a simple sorry, as if that could erase everything. As if an apology could undo the way he laughed in that room, or the way he let Laura make a spectacle of herself. And of me. Look, man, Alex continued when I didn't respond. Laura, she was, well, she was the one who started it. She came on to me. I didn't mean for any of it to go that far. I swear if I was sober, I would have stopped it. The words twisted in my gut like a knife. Hearing him shift the blame to her, to my wife, ignited something inside me. A raw, bitter fury clawed its way up from the pit of my stomach. I wanted to scream at him, to tear into him with every ounce of rage I had left. But I couldn't find the words. All I could do was sit there, my knuckles white from how hard I gripped the phone. You know how it is, right? Alex's voice faltered, as if he were expecting me to agree. As if he thought we could somehow laugh this off, the way we'd laughed off stupid mistakes in the past. But this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a drunken joke. This was betrayal, plain and simple. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound of his voice. But his words kept coming, each one digging deeper into my skin. I didn't mean to hurt you, man. It just happened. I know it looks bad, but you ruined my life, I muttered, cutting him off, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end. What? Alex asked, his voice tinged with confusion, as if he hadn't expected me to say anything at all. You ruined my life, I repeated, louder this time. The words felt foreign on my tongue, like they belonged to someone else. But they were true. He had ruined everything. Come on, man, don't say that. I gave you everything, I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. I trusted you. You were my best friend, and you. My throat closed up, cutting off the rest of my words. The anger was so overwhelming that I couldn't even speak. Alex let out a nervous laugh, the kind people use when they don't know how to respond. It only made things worse. Look, man, I know I messed up, but we can get past this, right? I mean, it's not like it was serious. It didn't mean anything. His words hit me like a slap in the face. Not serious? It didn't mean anything? He had torn apart my marriage, shattered my dignity in front of everyone I cared about. And to him, it was just some meaningless fling? I gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles ached. My heart pounded in my chest, the fury building to a point where it felt like I might explode. I wanted to reach through the phone, drag him into the room with me, and make him understand the depth of what he had done. But I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, helpless and broken, while Alex tried to talk his way out of the mess he had created. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for it to go like that. I thought. Shut up, I whispered, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. He fell silent. You'll pay for this, I muttered, more to myself than to him. You'll pay for everything. And with that, I ended the call, throwing the phone onto the couch beside me. My chest heaved with the weight of unsaid words, and I buried my face in my hands, trying to stop the tears that threatened to fall. I hated Alex. I hated Laura. But most of all, I hated myself for letting this happen, for trusting them both, for being too weak to stop it. The hours stretched on, the silence in the house deafening. And all I could do was lie there, drowning in the wreckage of my life, waiting for the next storm to hit. The days after that call blurred together into one long, suffocating week. I stayed on the couch, barely moving except to grab another bottle from the kitchen. The weight of everything sat heavy on my chest, an ache so deep it felt like I was drowning beneath it. Every morning I told myself I'd get up, try to make sense of it all, maybe even eat something. But instead, I reached for the bottle, hoping that alcohol would blur the edges of my pain and help me forget. It never worked, of course. Each drink only sharpened the betrayal, bringing every memory back in vivid detail. Laura's naked body, Alex's smug laughter, my family watching as my life crumbled. I'd cry until I was too exhausted to care, then pass out, only to wake up hours later and do it all over again. The house was a mess. Empty bottles scattered everywhere, clothes draped over chairs, and unopened texts and missed calls piling up on my phone. Laura tried calling a few times, sending messages that I refused to read. I couldn't hear her voice again. I couldn't stand the thought of her trying to explain, trying to worm her way back into my life with apologies that meant nothing. Every time the phone buzzed, it reminded me of Alex. His voice still haunted me, the casual way he tried to brush off what had happened. It didn't mean anything, he'd said, as if destroying my life was just a mistake to be forgiven. Forgive? I couldn't even comprehend the thought of it. The anger simmered beneath the surface, growing hotter with each passing day. No matter how much I drank, I couldn't drown it. No matter how many tears I shed, the rage stayed there, waiting. And with every passing hour, it grew harder to contain. By the sixth day, I was a hollow version of myself, unshaven, dehydrated, and barely holding on. I had cycled through every emotion, grief, anger, shame, until all that was left was one undeniable truth. I couldn't let this go. Alex had taken everything from me, my trust, my pride, my marriage, and then had the audacity to treat it like a joke. I couldn't live with that. It ate away at me, poisoning every thought, every breath, until I knew there was only one thing I could do. I had to confront him. That thought took root in my mind, and once it did, there was no escaping it. I couldn't sit in my misery any longer, couldn't lie there drinking myself into oblivion while Alex went about his life as if nothing had happened. No, he had to understand what he had done. He had to feel it. Fueled by rage and alcohol, I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the house, not bothering to clean up the mess I left behind. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets as I walked, my heart pounding with every step. I didn't know what I was going to say when I saw him. I didn't even know what I wanted. I just knew I couldn't sit still anymore. It didn't take long to find out where he was staying. Word had already spread that he wasn't at his apartment. He'd holed up in some hotel, probably hoping to ride out the aftermath until things blew over. Coward. When I reached the hotel, I pushed through the front doors, my breath shallow with anticipation. The receptionist gave me a strange look, but I ignored it. I took the stairs two at a time, the fury building with every step until it felt like my chest might explode. I found his room number easily. My fist pounded against the door before I could think twice. The door opened, and there he was, Alex, looking bleary-eyed and disheveled, wearing the same smirk that had haunted me all week. That smirk was the final straw. Before he could say a word, I lunged at him. I wasn't thinking anymore, just moving, acting on pure instinct. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him hard against the wall, the impact rattling the cheap artwork hanging beside him. He staggered, his eyes wide with surprise, but I didn't care. I needed him to understand, to feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused me. My fist collided with his shoulder, not enough to do real damage, but enough to make him stumble back again. He swore under his breath, raising his arms defensively, but I kept going, shoving him harder this time. The anger poured out of me in waves, and for once, I felt in control. "You ruined everything," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. Alex tried to push me off, but I was faster, cornering him with another shove. His back hit the wall with a dull thud, and I watched as the realization sank into his eyes. This wasn't going to be a quick apology and a shrug. "I told you I was sorry," he shouted, raising his hands in surrender. But sorry wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I clenched my fists, my knuckles white from the pressure. I wanted to hit him again, harder this time, but something in me pulled back at the last second. This wasn't about breaking him physically. It was about making him feel the weight of what he'd done. Just a taste of the betrayal and humiliation he had inflicted on me. I shoved him one last time, sending him sprawling onto the floor. He groaned, clutching his side, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. He deserved every bit of it. "Do you think this is over?" I hissed, my breath ragged. "You don't get to walk away from this like it didn't happen." Alex coughed, wincing as he tried to sit up. "You need to calm down, man," he muttered, his voice shaky. "Calm down?" I barked, looming over him. "You destroyed my life, and you think I should calm down?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, avoiding my gaze, as if looking at me would make things worse. And maybe it would. I stood there for a moment, my chest heaving, the anger still coursing through my veins. But slowly, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind only exhaustion. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had done what I came to do. There was no point in dragging it out. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Alex crumpled on the floor behind me. As I reached the stairwell, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, not caring who it was. For the first time in days, I felt something other than misery. It wasn't quite satisfaction. There was no undoing what had happened, but it was close. It was closure. I left Alex's hotel room without looking back, my footsteps heavy but sure. The cool evening air greeted me outside, a sharp contrast to the suffocating rage that had consumed me minutes earlier. I had thought the confrontation would bring me peace, maybe even make the pain go away. But as I walked home, all I felt was emptiness. Yes, I had hit him. I had shoved him and watched him stumble, his cocky grin wiped clean off his face. But it hadn't been enough. Nothing could undo the damage. Nothing would give me back what I'd lost. There was no punch hard enough to reverse the betrayal or erase the memory of my wife laughing with him, naked and shameless. The night air bit at my skin, grounding me as I tried to process the fact that my world was still in pieces, no matter how hard I fought. The relief I'd felt right after the attack evaporated quickly, leaving only a familiar bitterness in its place. When I reached home, I collapsed onto the couch again, emotionally drained. I wanted to disappear, to shut the world out and sleep for days. But before I could even settle, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Reluctantly, I fished it out, hoping it wasn't Laura. It wasn't her. It was the police. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Alex had reported me. I should have seen it coming. He had always been good at playing the victim when things didn't go his way. But somehow, I had convinced myself he wouldn't. I answered the call, bracing myself for what was to come. The officer on the other end was calm, but firm. "We have a report of an altercation at a hotel involving you," he said. "We need you to come in for questioning." I felt the world tilt again beneath my feet, as if I were caught in a never-ending spiral of bad decisions. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. What was done was done. I agreed to meet them the next day, knowing that refusing would only make things worse. As soon as the call ended, I sank deeper into the couch, every muscle in my body aching from the weight of my choices. I had been so consumed by rage that I hadn't thought about the consequences. And now, here they were, knocking on my door. The next day at the station was a blur. I sat in a sterile room, answering questions about what had happened at the hotel. I tried to explain my side, but the officer's expression never changed. It didn't matter why I had done it, only that I had done it. And Alex, of course, had made sure to paint himself as the victim, conveniently omitting the part where he'd slept with my wife. After a brief court hearing, I was told that I'd been charged with assault and trespassing. The judge offered bail, $75,000, and another bitter blow followed when I was ordered to pay Alex $10,000 in damages. I didn't have much left in savings, but I scraped it together, knowing I didn't have a choice. The thought of spending even a day in jail was unbearable. Once the ordeal was over, I stood outside the courthouse, staring blankly at the world around me. The humiliation weighed heavier than ever. I'd lost everything, my wife, my best friend, my dignity, and now I was bleeding money just to escape the mess I'd made trying to get revenge. When I returned home, the house felt more like a tomb than ever. I sat on the couch, surrounded by the remnants of my week-long bender, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. Laura hadn't called again. I hadn't expected her to. The only thing left between us was the wreckage of what had once been love. I knew, deep down, that there was no saving us. I couldn't forgive her, and she wouldn't undo what she'd done. Even if I tried to piece things back together, the cracks would always show. We were beyond repair. I sold the house a week later, packed my things, and left without telling anyone. I didn't say goodbye to Laura, and I didn't tell Alex where I was going. I just needed to leave, to escape the place where everything had fallen apart. I moved to a new town, far enough away that I wouldn't run into anyone from my old life. Starting over wasn't easy. At night, the memories still haunted me. The laughter, the betrayal, the text from my grandfather saying how ashamed he was. But as the days went by, the pain dulled. The wound was still there, but it didn't bleed as much. There were no grand moments of healing. No epiphanies, no closure. Just the quiet realization that I had survived. Somehow, Despite everything, I was still here.